dyed her hair was very telling. It meant that the subjugators were more than mindless warriors, and that raised even more questions. Why are you doing what you're doing? Koskov wondered, trying to read the woman's face. It was stoic, emotionless, but there was a determination there that couldn't be denied. But whose determination? Hers or the Queen's? The forward turbines rotated down, glowing orange as they spun up. Waves of superheated air pounding against the ground and throwing up grass and dirt. The wing flaps folded down as the rear turbines fired up. Yes, Applin whispered. Get the fuck out of there. The first Vindicator reached the Starlifter and slammed the butt of his rifle against the hull. The second did the same. The third launched himself off a meter-high boulder, leaping onto the protruding sensor cluster on the dropship's nose. He almost lost his grip twice as he pulled himself up, then carefully straightened to pound on the cockpit's viewport. Son of a bitch! Pharaoh shouted, still off camera. The first group of drones raced past the Vindicators, heading for the rear ramp that was still closing. Two stopped under the rear starboard wing and turned to face each other, putting their hands together. You've got to be kidding me, Koskov said. As a third drone approached, he jumped, put a foot into the cradle made by the other two, and they launched him onto the wing. A moment later, they did the same with another, and another. They crossed to the fuselage, splitting off the ship's spine, two toward the cockpit, two toward the rear. The rear turbines coughed, sending a blast of air out in all directions, knocking several drones off their feet. Goddamn, what is she doing? Scholes said, teeth gritted. Pharaoh, lift off! What the fuck do you think I'm trying to do? Pharaoh shouted. All my systems are fucked. That blast must have screwed up more than we realized. At the rear, two drones were pulling up a meter-wide panel, pried loose from the fuselage, exposing an emergency access hatch. They tossed the panel aside, immediately going to work on the circular wheel, trying to open it. If they get inside there, Love said, trailing off as he exchanged a horrified look with Scholes. Pharaoh, you need to get out of there, Scholes said. Take off, now! The engines flared, sending powerful waves across the rocky field. The sound of the drive pitching up reverberated around the crew as the image on the screen shook, flicking slightly as the ship started to lift off the ground. One of the Vindicators jumped and grabbed the edge of the wing, holding on as his feet left the ground. The one on the ground fired into the ship's belly, the hollow twangs echoing through the open feed. The rest of the drones slowed, spreading out to form a line on either side of the Vindicator, watching. Come on, Koskov thought, mentally trying to push the ship higher into the air. The Starlifter pitched slightly to port, causing some of the drones to lose their balance and slide off. They hit hard and didn't get up, their bodies pushed across the rocky ground by the turbine's jet wash. The Vindicator on the nose lost his grip on the bottom rim of the viewport and fell back, losing his rifle in the process, and slammed into the boulder he jumped from. Koskov cringed at the way his back snapped on impact. On internal feed, the dropship's interior lights flickered. The engine sounds changed, pitching down, and Pharaoh cursed. On the external feed, the horizon, which had slowly dropped away, abruptly came back up as the Starlifter's nose dipped back toward the ground. What the fuck? Pharaoh shouted off screen. I've lost flight controls. Pharaoh? Scholes asked. What's going on? What's your status? My engine's just shut down. Not sure what happened. It's like someone flipped a switch or something. I'm having a hard time even working through the system. It's like something is fighting me for control of the aircraft. Cam? Koskov asked, not bothering to hide it. I'm attempting to connect to the shuttle's flight computer. The dropship touched back down, landing almost exactly where it had taken off from. The Vindicator hanging from the wing pulled himself up and moved across to the fuselage, before continuing along the spine toward the cockpit. He pulled his rifle around on its sling, shouldering it like a professional soldier. Blood pumped in Koskov's ears as a second Vindicator followed the first. Another group of drones followed, and more joined the group clustered around the emergency access hatch at the rear. Others took up pounding at random segments along the dropship's underbelly. Some were wedging fingers into the seams around the hatches, trying to pry them open. "Cam," Koskov repeated. "Working." Koskov gritted her teeth, cutting off a curse. "Work faster!" "Pharaoh, report!" Shoals snapped. "I don't know," Pharaoh said, coming back into frame. "I've been cut out of the system. Flight controls, life support, everything. I'm locked out completely. My request for access has been denied. Blocked." "Blocked by who?" Koskov asked. Shoals straightened, turning away from the screen, arms extending, palms up. "What the hell is going on here? Baker, did that Nasser horn do something?" "I don't..." Koskov didn't hear the rest of Baker's answer as Cam spoke. "Approximately 2.3 seconds prior to the dropship loss of power, Stork established a remote connection to the Starlifter's flight computer." Koskov didn't need any more explanation than that. "Keller, you son of a bitch." She pointed at Baker. "Get him back on the line." "What is it?" Shoals asked. "What's going on?" "Keller shut her out," Koskov explained. "He's using Stork's AI to remotely control the dropship." "That's impossible," Love said. "He can't just override operator control." "Apparently he can," Applin said. Shoals opened his mouth, but closed it again without saying anything. Finally he said, "Can we work around it?" "Cam's trying, but Stork is fighting her," Koskov said. "Why would he take over the dropship?" Love asked. "That's insane. No one would do that, especially not while it's under attack. Those people need help. They could get exposed to whatever's affecting the rest of the colonists." "That's precisely why he did it," Koskov said. "He's ultra-paranoid about letting anything get back to the ship. If those people manage to get on board the dropship..." "There is a threat of contamination," Cam said. "If Pharaoh has been infected somehow..." "She's not infected," Koskov said, cutting Cam off. "He's acting on fear. The bastard hasn't been reasonable since we got the initial messages about the attack on the colony. We need to shut down his access to the surface. Cam, I do not have sufficient permissions to interfere with Stork's operational routines," Cam said in Koskov's ear. "Just try." "What are you doing?" Shoals asked. "Someone's got to fix this shitstorm before it gets any worse. Cam, I want you to cut the link. Can you do that?" Shoals pointed at her. "Now hold on a minute." "I do not have access to Stork's communication array," Cam said, her voice as calm as ever. More reverberating clangs echoed through the dropship's feed as the drones and Vindicators continued their efforts to get inside. The lights flickered again, followed by a klaxon alarm. Pharaoh looked away from the screen for a brief moment, then turned back, her face terrified but resolute. "They breached emergency egress hatch 2. Meyer, look out back there! They're getting through!" "Can you shut it down somehow?" Koskov asked, trying to keep her mind off the chaos around her and focus on the task at hand. "Physically disconnected from the system? What about going out there and beating it with a stick?" Applin suggested. Shoals' finger moved from Koskov to Applin. "No one is destroying any part of this ship, not under any circumstances." "Keller is going to get those people killed, Shoals," Koskov said. "Are you okay with that? Are you okay with just standing around here doing nothing when we could have done something to help them?" Shoals looked away and spoke robotically. "We don't know enough about the situation to make an informed decision at this time." "Don't know enough." Koskov put her arms out to her sides. "What more do you need to know? No, you know what? That's bullshit. If you're not going to do something about this, I will." Shoals reached for her as she turned for the ladder. "You're not going to do anything!" Before she'd even realized she was going to do it, she spun and slammed her fist into his nose. There was a barely audible crack, and Shoals' head snapped back, hands coming up instinctively to protect himself. He stumbled back a few steps before he caught himself, his eyes wide in shock and confusion. A rage like Koskov hadn't felt before burned in her chest. She could feel her entire body quiver as she pointed, every muscle clenched. When she spoke, her voice was stone. "Don't fucking touch me," Scholes pulled his hands away, fingers red with blood. Love stepped in front of the Major, his expression mirroring Scholes's own shock. Stand down, Lieutenant. Do you have any idea the shitstorm you just brought down on yourself? I'm going to fix this clusterfuck of a disaster before anything else goes wrong. I'm afraid you're not going anywhere, Lieutenant Koskov. Keller's voice rang out around them, even and calm. They all turned to see his face on the main viewer. You will all stand down immediately. This mission has quite rapidly gone from bad to worse, and I will not allow it to deteriorate any further. Koskov squared on the display. Won't allow? You don't have any authority over our mission here, Colonel. Yes, I believe we have established that during our previous conversations. Keller sounded like an irritated adult trying for the 100th time to explain something to a child. It is a fact you have not let me forget. However, as I have repeatedly been forced to remind you, I am in command of this ship and its contents. I am solely responsible for the souls on board, and I will allow nothing to interfere with or threaten this responsibility. Scholes stepped forward, both hands cradling his damaged nose, his voice nasally. Colonel, I believe... You can't stop me, Koskov said. Stop, Scholes mumbled. I am in command here. You aren't, Koskov said, then pointed to Keller. And you are not a god. You can't dictate what we can and can't do, and you can't keep me from helping those people. You're going to get those people killed. A regrettable situation indeed, Keller said, not sounding the least bit regretful. But I will not risk the security of this ship. So you're going to let Farrell die. You're going to let Meyer die. What about my husband and his team? What about the hundreds, thousands of people down there that need our help? What about them? Are you just going to let them die? Lieutenant Koskov, I understand your feelings regarding this matter. You don't understand a goddamn thing, Koskov said, cutting him off. Release your hold on the Starlifter right now. I cannot do that. For fuck's sake, what is wrong with you? Koskov shouted. I'm going down there. She spun and reached for the ladder. As I say, Keller said, his voice still even and calm, I cannot allow that to happen. The hatch to ops opened and 6 men in navy blue uniforms filed in, each taking a position on either side of the hatch. All had crickets holstered to their thighs, and all wore stone-faced expressions. What the hell is this? Love demanded, moving to the edge of the platform, hands on the rail. Koskov hesitated, one foot on the top rung. You've got to be kidding me. What are you going to do? Shoot us? My sincere hope is that it will not come to that, Keller said. This is insane, Love squeaked. Colonel Keller, this is completely unacceptable, Scholes said, taking a hand away from his nose, checking to see if the bleeding had stopped. Koskov slid to the bottom of the ladder. You can't stop us all. Stand down, Lieutenant Koskov, Keller said. Once I am sure the danger has passed, I will release my control of the operation. But until then... Halfway to the exit, Koskov spun, desperation filling her entire body. You're a real son of a bitch, Keller. You're not going to get away with this. I won't let you. Keller only nodded. Sergeant? Sir. The guard in the middle nodded and stepped forward. The 2 directly beside him moved with him. Lieutenant Natalia Koskov, by order of Colonel Keller, commanding officer of Colonial 1, you are under arrest. You are advised to remain silent until legal counsel can be provided. Go fuck yourself, Koskov said, holding her ground. Do not resist. The remaining guards came forward, hands on their weapons. Tally, Applin called from behind her. Koskov turned and Applin shook her head. Don't. All the rage and hatred and fear she'd ever felt in her entire life was nothing compared to what she felt at that moment. Her hands ached from squeezing so tight, blood pounded in her ears, and her chest felt like it was going to explode. She felt an almost overwhelming urge to lash out as the guards moved around her, grabbing her arms and holding them tight as they secured the wrist cuffs. They turned her to face the main display. Keller's face looked just as stoic as it had every time they talked. And that, more than anything, enraged Koskov even further.
You can't do this.
Yes, Lieutenant, Keller said. I can. 28. Lander slowed his rig, trying to catch his breath. He keyed his comm. Rodriguez, come in. No answer. He checked his watch. The plan was to meet back here 20 minutes after the mission. They were a little early, but that didn't help ease his anxiety.
Son of a bitch. Still nothing?
Conley asked, coming up beside him. Lander shook his head. He checked their trail, but there was still no sign of pursuers.
Why aren't they following us?
Maybe we're just lucky. No one's that lucky. He keyed the comm again. Hector, Giovanni, come in. Conley arched an eyebrow at him. Behind him, Williams approached, his armored canopy up. He was drenched in sweat.
We need to keep moving.
Not until I know my people are safe, Lander said. He turned, squaring up to the old rig. And why the hell aren't they following us?
Honestly, I don't know. The drones don't ever venture far from the colony without a vindicator nearby. Maybe that subjugator we took out gave them pause.
Conley laughed.
Never seen moves like that before, boss. Don't think they taught that in driver school.
They didn't, Lander said. That I learned from the greatest escape artist that's ever lived.
Oh?
My daughter, Lander explained. He tapped the comm again. Rodriguez, come in. He clenched his jaw at the silence that followed, not wanting to consider its implications. He checked his watch again. They were late.
Boss?
Conley asked. We give them 5 more minutes.
We need to get back to the outpost before Sakato and Jamil go to blows.
Lander motioned with a steel arm. Go. We'll follow. Williams hesitated, seemed to see the determination in Lander's eyes, then nodded and turned to leave. They watched him disappear through the trees, and Lander wondered just how much shit the man had gotten himself into. Not like it matters, he thought. Survival isn't the same thing as living. When the sounds of Williams's rig had vanished, Conley said,
What do you think?
Lander turned, searching the forest, resisting the urge to try the comm again. I don't know what to think.
Maybe they got turned around.
It's possible. He checked his watch. 4 minutes. You should head back.
Not a chance.
Lander picked bits of grass and earth from his cage as the seconds ticked by, trying to keep himself busy. Losing soldiers was a part of war, but for some reason he couldn't quite reconcile what was happening now as war. Not to mention that his people weren't soldiers. They were construction workers, just like him, for all that he wanted to think differently. It was the truth. And what kind of war is fought by construction workers? He asked himself. After clearing most of the clumps of dirt, he visually inspected the rest of the rig. Everything looked functional, and he had all greens on his internal diagnostic. The blogger caught his eye, and he realized the chamber was empty. The image of him emptying the weapon into the Nasserhorn flashed in his mind. He reached back, grabbed another cylinder, and slapped it into the chamber with an echoing bang. The sound startled Conley, who spun, raising her sword above her steel frame. It's okay. Lander raised his hands.
Jesus, boss, don't do that shit.
Lander was about to answer when a mechanical whine of servos and heavy footfalls caught his ear. He turned toward the sound, raising his steel arm, leveling the blogger. 2 orcas appeared through the trees and brush, frames burnt and scarred from fighting.
Hey, boss, it's me,
Rodriguez said, his voice about 3 octaves higher than normal.
Don't shoot!
What happened? Lander said. Rodriguez stopped his rig in front of Lander's and lifted his cockpit cage.
Fucking mean bastards. Nasserhorn charged us, Sabatini said, stopping beside his partner. We pushed in after our initial attack, and the damn thing rushed us. A lot of armed fighters flanked from the west, and before we knew it, they were pushing us deeper into the colony,
Rodriguez explained, giving the younger driver a sidelong glance.
Took us a bit to find a good exit, and we smashed a lot of the colony in the process, but...
Erskine got hit, Lander said. It was a statement, not a question. Rodriguez sniffed and looked away.
Took an HE round right to the back as we were slipping through the wall.
You sure it was HE? Conley asked.
Pretty sure. Why? Well, if it was explosive and not penetrating, the orca's backplating might have protected him.
Rodriguez's expression hardened.
I saw him go down. He didn't respond. Those fuckers were swarming anyway, Sabatini added. Even if we'd have wanted to get to him, we couldn't have. He was done, Rodriguez said through clenched teeth.
As much as Lander wanted to argue, he held back. It was natural to play what ifs, and I would have done something different, but if you weren't there in the thick of it, then there wasn't really any way to know. Would he have gone after Erskine? A big part of him said yes, but another, perhaps more practical side said it would have depended on the situation. And if these two men thought there hadn't been any other way, he had to accept that. You did the right thing, Lander said.
Any other losses?
Sabatini asked. Lander nodded. Don't know who they are, though. They were Saccato's people. Come on, let's go find out if it was worth the price we paid.
You exposed them!
A woman shouted from inside the outpost's central building. Lander and Conley paused just outside the door as Williams responded. We took the fight to the enemy, Williams countered. Something we should have done months ago. Hell, years ago, before being forced into this. Sounds like someone's not happy, Conley said. No, Lander said. It doesn't. He stepped through the door into the assembly room that was already packed to capacity. Lander pressed himself against the wall to slide past several onlookers to a back corner. Sasek sat red-faced, clearly upset at what they'd done. Jamil, on the other hand, looked as if he was still contemplating.
You risked their lives and the lives of everyone else out here,
Sasek said.
Our lives are already at risk,
Williams countered.
and our people know that. That is why they've chosen to remain. Without their help, none of this would be possible. How many people have they saved over the years? Dozens? Hundreds? We saved 18 just today.
Yeah, Sasek said, her tone thick with contempt.
Losing so many will only enrage her further.
Possibly, Williams said. But frankly, I don't really give a damn what she thinks. Soon she'll be rotting in the ground, and we'll be picking up the pieces.
Rotting? You think you're going to launch another attack? What in God's name would make you think we'd authorize that? You've kicked up a hornet's nest, Williams. A goddamn hornet's nest.
Jamil cleared his throat. Well, technically, we didn't authorize the first one. Sasek, who was already in the midst of responding, went quiet, narrowing her eyes at her counterpart. The mission was successful, Williams said, obviously taking the momentary break in ass-chewing to throw out a positive. Sasek scoffed.
Successful? What did you get, a few rockets?
We were able to secure a lot more than that, actually, Williams said, barely disguised frustration in his voice. Several thousand rounds of ammo for the rigs, a few modular weapon systems, handheld rifles, a couple AR-72s.
And what?
Sasek said, cutting him off.
You think those weapons are going to be enough to destroy the hive? Do any of you think that?
She scanned around the room, her gaze zeroing in on Lander. She pointed.
You. This is your fault. You did this.
Lander raised both hands. Hey, listen, It wasn't his decision, Williams countered. It was mine.
A decision you wouldn't have made without pressure from him.
Or maybe he would have if you people weren't cowering out here in the middle of nowhere, trying desperately to hold on to the lie that you're safe. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Lander. Look, you've all been dealing with this shit for a lot longer than me, granted. But I'd be willing to bet that not a one of you really truly believes you can survive out here indefinitely. Eventually, your supplies are going to run out, or the hive is going to decide they've had enough of your shit, and come out here and wipe you all off the face of the planet. Am I right? No one answered. That's what I thought. So maybe instead of pointing fingers and trying to find someone to blame, we need to take a step back and consider what's actually going on here. Not doing something isn't the answer. Maybe you should also consider the people that gave their lives so you could have the chance to do something, to fight back, to honor their memory and the memory of everyone else who's died out here for nothing. Lander took a breath, surprised at the veracity of his words. But judging from the cowed expressions throughout the room, his words had hit the mark. Maybe what these people need is a little kick in the ass, he thought. Lieutenant Williams, Jamil said. How many people did you lose?
Williams straightened. 2, sir. And Specialist Lander lost one of his own. Jamil turned to Lander, face a mask of sympathy.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
If you lost one of yours, that means the Hive has another rig to use against us, Sasek said.
You don't know that, Jamil said. It's likely that none of her subjugators even know how to drive the damn things.
Oh, and they can't learn?
You were all talking about what the Hive might do, Lander said, stepping into the center of the room. I want to know why we aren't talking about what we're going to do.
And what would you do?
Jamil asked, sounding legitimately curious. Without missing a beat, Lander said, we take the fight to them. That was the entire point of raiding their armory. Sasek laughed.
You don't even know what you're talking about.
I know I didn't come out here to be abandoned by the ship and scrape by just surviving. We came here to live, to build a life and a new home. I have a family waiting for me up there. He pointed to the ceiling. And I didn't bring them here so we could hide and cower in huts afraid of the big bad wolf.
Well, congratulations, Sasek told him. You brought your family to a war zone. Was it worth it?
Fury filled Lander's chest, and it was everything he could do not to lash out and strangle her words right out of her throat. Instead, he said, do I still think fighting for this planet is worth it? You're goddamn right I do. Why the hell do you think I came down here? I'm not a fighter anymore. I'm just a rig driver. I could have stayed up there and been perfectly safe, but I didn't. I chose to come down here and put my ass on the line because I believe this place is worth fighting for. It's really a shame you don't. The silence in the room was deafening. Blood pounded in his ears as he looked around the room. Reading the shock and occasional amused expression, he began to wonder if he'd stepped over the line. Then he realized he didn't care. He took one last look at Sasek, who looked like she was on the verge of blowing a gasket, and walked out.
That was amazing,
Conley said, following Lander out of the building. Probably should have kept my mouth shut.
Fuck that. She needed a good ass kicking.
It's not going to help our cause.
Boss, our cause is their cause, Conley said. They just haven't come to terms with it yet.
Lander turned at footsteps coming up behind him. Williams shook his head. I don't know that anyone's ever handed that woman her ass in her life. I think she's still trying to figure out what happened. Believe it or not, that's not what I intended. I couldn't care less if you'd done it entirely by mistake. Someone needed to do it, and it damn sure wasn't going to be any of these people. Hell, by morning you might very well be a hero around this place. Conley laughed.
Steal a bunch of weapons to win a war. Meh. Talk shit to someone. Hero. It tracks.
It doesn't track. I don't want to be a hero. Never did. That's not why I'm here. If that's not what they want, it's not about her, Williams said, cutting him off. Sasek doesn't speak for all of us. I think that most of us would agree with you 100%. You think? We went with you, right? We raided the colony with you, right? Most of us here believe we need to do something for all the reasons you've already said. And trust me, those people are in the majority. When it's time to act, they'll act. The time is now, Lieutenant. Lander stopped to face him. What about what she said? Will the Hive come after us out here? Williams hesitated for a moment. It's never happened before, but it's possible. Lander scanned his surroundings, trying to ignore the bad feeling in his gut. We're going to need to talk about defenses. We can use the barracks. I've already got a map laid out. I need to check on Ross first, Lander said. We're going to need to look at what we have, who can use it, and where to put it. We'll need an accurate list of items acquired today as well. I have a feeling bloggers and swords aren't going to cut it if it comes to an all-out fight. Sakato is sorting it all out as we speak. That triggered a memory. I saw him arguing with some of the underground fighters during the raid. Do you know what that was about? Williams pursed his lips. My guess is he was asking about one of the subjugators, a woman named Harlan Gray. He's been trying to get at her since this whole thing started. He was probably trying to convince someone to go after her.
Why do you say that?
Conley asked. Gray killed his brother, shot him in cold blood right when the Hive was taking over the colony. Gray was one of the first converts. Lander frowned. Converts? It's what some of us call the others. They were converted somehow to work for the Queen as part of the Hive. He put his hands up. It's not a popular title, but a lot of us think it fits. They reached the building where they'd been treating Ross, and Lander hesitated before opening the door. You know, after almost 3 years of dealing with this Hive, you people don't seem to know much about it. Yeah, well, there isn't much time available for research. Lander wanted to press the issue, but realized it probably wouldn't get them anywhere. You don't know what you don't know, he thought. Then opened the door. Rodriguez stood near the foot of Ross's bed, hand resting on the cricket's grip. The weapon was still holstered on his chest, and despite his usually cavalier approach to their circumstances so far, the concern spread across his face was extremely telling. That's when he saw the restraints around Ross's hands and feet and chest. "What the hell is this?" Lander asked, stepping around to the side of the bed.
Medic had to tie him down,
Rodriguez explained.
Said he was trying to fight them, to come after us.
"Where'd she go?"
Said she was going to get something to eat.
Lander put a hand on the man's arm. Ross immediately jerked away, his entire body tensing. The veins in his neck bulged, his lips curled into a sneer of fury and agony, exposing gritted teeth as he pulled against his restraints. He gave a wordless growl, the sound strained and cracked. "What the fuck's wrong with him?" Lander demanded. "He's converting," Williams said, hand moving to the pistol holstered on his waist. As his thumb popped the catch, Lander drew his cricket, the weapon unfolding even as he leveled its sights on the man's chest. "Don't." Williams hesitated, eyes moving from Lander's weapon to the man still groaning and pulling against his restraints. Slowly, he showed both hands, palms out, empty. "I told you," Lander said. "No one is touching my man." "They'll come for him," Williams said. "Sounds like that's inevitable, regardless of his situation."
How long?
Conley asked.
Hours.
She looked down at Ross, expression a mask of concern.
And once he's converted, there isn't anything we can do? Nothing at all?
Williams pursed his lips and shook his head.
We need to kill that maldita perra,
Rodriguez said, fist clenched at his side, the fury on his face unmistakable. "Unfortunately, that's not as simple as it sounds." "I don't know," Lander said. "It sounds pretty fucking simple to me. All I need is to catch her in my sights." He mimed firing a hand pistol. "Killing is the easy part," Williams said. "It's finding her that's the hard part. She moves around a lot." "So not a fortified position?" Williams sighed. "Like I said, it's hard to say. No one has ever seen an active den, and the two we have found were almost completely cleared out. We know she likes caves, but other than that..." He trailed off. Lander nodded. "The next time we have contact with Stork, we'll have them start scanning for possible locations. On top of that, we need to have people out scouting for it right now. Sitting around here waiting isn't going to do us any good. We're running out of time." "What do you mean?" Lander pointed to the ceiling. "Keller is prepping Stork to leave right now." "He can't do that." "He's doing it." Lander checked his watch. "My guess is we have less than 24 hours before he heads back to Earth."
There has to be a way to stop him,
Williams argued. "They can't just abandon us out here." "My wife is up there working on that right now. But as it stands, the only thing that'll keep that ship and our people here is getting rid of the alien menace. We need an army. We need to survive what's coming."
You're sure they'll press the attack out here?
Conley asked.
I thought you said they'd never bothered you before.
"They haven't, but after today, I'm sure they're pissed."
Fuck them,
Rodriguez said.
Look at what they did.
Williams held up a hand. "I'm not siding with them, I'm just saying the Queen will want payback, especially after we killed one of her subjugators."
They killed one of ours,
Rodriguez countered.
I'd say we're squared up.
Lander shook his head. "No, we're nowhere near squared." 29. Koskov leaned against the face of the industrial-sized washing machine behind her, resting her head against the cold plastic. They'd shut all the machines down before leaving, but she could still feel the residual heat from a previous load, and was grateful the machine was off. It would have been unbearably hot if all 20 machines had been running. The rhythmic pops and hisses coming from the machines echoed through the compartment, slowing as if they were experiencing slow deaths. Who arrests someone and puts them in the laundry? She asked herself, lightly tapping the back of her head against the molded plastic. She was still having problems processing what had happened. Sure, she had her differences with Scholes and Keller, but the level of ignorance they were showing didn't make any sense. The mission hadn't gone the way they'd anticipated, but that didn't mean they had to tuck their tails and run, pack their bags, and head home. It was like they'd all forgotten Tranquility was supposed to be their home, not just some vacation spot they'd be able to leave once they got bored. If the recruitment literature hadn't been explicit about that point, the weekly orientation briefings and interviews had been. There would be no going back to Earth. Especially with everything going on, Koskov couldn't fathom the level of ineptitude on display. They were experiencing probably the most important and dangerous event in human history, and these men were measuring the size of their dicks. And now, she was stuck in the laundry. Fucking cowards. She pushed off the machine and started pacing around the compartment. A pipe creaked near the back of the compartment. The panel beside the hatch blinked on and off and on again, the images flickering along with the lights along the middle of the ceiling. Unrecognizable sound popped through hidden speakers, then went silent again. A series of misses started and stopped within the workings of the units around Koskov. One unit chimed, coming to life briefly before shutting back down again. The guard near the hatch straightened abruptly at the sudden fluctuations, gloved hands tightening around his stinger baton. The name tape on his navy blue overalls identified him as R. Khan, a sergeant, according to the rank device above his name. He met Koskov's eyes, obviously more than a little confused and apprehensive. What the hell was that? Is that you, Cam? Koskov wondered. My knight in shining armor? She touched the plug behind her ear where her comm disc should have been. It felt strange to be disconnected from Cam after all these years. What had it been? Almost 10? Long before her program had been designated the Colonial AI. The lights flickered again. The guard's gaze darted between the light panels along the ceiling. Son of a bitch. Maybe you should find out what's going on, Koskov suggested, crossing her arms, giving him a determined look. Khan's jaw worked side to side, muscles clenching, but he didn't respond. Koskov eyed him for a moment, briefly considering trying to rush him, but thought better of it. Despite doing more operational work in the last few days than she'd done throughout the majority of her career, she was no operator. The last time she'd practiced any kind of hand-to-hand had been in officer selection school, and even then, it had only been a 3-day course. Put a cricket in her hand, however, and that changed things. She was a crack shot. Joel had taught her as part of his own personal training regimen, drilling her over and over on tactical ranges, not wanting her to live on an alien world without being able to defend herself. The guard cleared his throat and looked away, staring blankly at the maze of pipes and conduits weaving through the compartment. The lights flickered again. 10 washing units and 10 drying units flanked a 3-meter walkway, all connected by a series of complicated pipes and valves to various parts of the ship. Each of the crew's uniforms were tagged with a specific code that enabled the system to clean, dry, and return them to the correct person with virtually no input from the crew. The metal deck plating rang under her feet with each step, muffled by the incessant thrum of the Stork's massive drive section. She traced the pipes along the ceiling and found 2 hatches, one partially covered by a cluster of pipe and conduit running the length of the compartment. The other, just above the guard's head, was marked as a mechanical access way, leading into one of the ship's dozens of crawl spaces. If she could... The hatch behind her lone guard opened. Surprised, Khan spun, then visibly relaxed and backed away. Keller ducked into the compartment. His uniform was finely pressed, boots polished to a reflective shine, sleeves rolled to just below the elbow. He wore a cricket, holstered on his right thigh. "You may wait outside, Sergeant." The guard gave a curt, silent nod and stepped out of the compartment, pulling the hatch closed behind him. Keller stood, hands clasped behind him, eyeing Koskov with what appeared to be sympathy. "Well," Koskov said, Is this where you shine a bright light in my face? He sniffed. You may find this hard to believe, but I do not wish you or your husband any ill will. Very much to the contrary. I want this mission to succeed more than you know. Yeah, you have a funny way of showing it. Wanting your mission to succeed does not preclude me from ensuring the security of my ship and my people, Lieutenant. I believe this is something we agree on, yes. I would rather you stand your post than be confined down here, but you have left me with no choice. Koskov laughed. Choice? You had a choice. You had a choice to defend our home, to help our people. Instead, you chose to leave them high and dry, without any backup or resources. I cannot. You can, Koskov said, cutting him off. She pointed at him. And you left Pharaoh and Meyer to die. You did that. She could have made it back. We could have helped her. And the risk contaminating this ship and her crew? Unacceptable. The lights flickered again. The machine beside Keller came to life, the internal light coming on as the drum began to spin, the control panel blinking on and off. Keller barely reacted, giving the machine a sidelong glance. He nodded toward the machine. Is this you? Koskov held her hands out. How can I do anything? You stuck me in a room with no access to anything. Do not play these games with me, Lieutenant. I know your connection to Cam is more extensive than anyone else on board. I know who your father was. Koskov kept her face stoic, now wanting to give him the satisfaction of knowing he was right. I don't control Cam any more than the next person. She's a colonial asset. That is all. Keller smiled. I think you are not such a convincing liar as you believe. When Koskov didn't respond, he continued. The Stork will defeat this attack on our systems, I guarantee you this. And any damage caused will be directly attributed to you and the AI. You will be charged and convicted in a court-martial and sent to prison when we arrive back on Earth. Whatever Cam is doing, she's doing out of concern for the success of our mission here. That is what she's programmed to do. That being said, your jurisdiction here stops at your crew. I am not subject to your orders or your interpretation of the law. I do not recognize your authority to detain me or to inhibit Trank 2's mission here. If anyone is in the wrong here, it's you, sir. Another washing unit activated. Internal motors whirring to life as the lights flashed, screen blinking. You're free to believe whatever you wish, Lieutenant, Keller said. However, believing a thing does not make the thing correct. Your interpretation of events is both flawed and biased. I wish these circumstances were different, but wishing does not change reality. The reality is that we are in an extremely volatile situation, one which we are not adequately equipped to handle. The only viable option here is to retreat and return with a better equipped and capable force to confront this threat, whatever it is. And by the time you get back, everyone down there could be dead or under that bitch's control. It is possible. Unfortunately, there is no other choice. There is always a choice, Koskov said. We stay and fight. There are people down there right now, fighting and dying for our home. People just waiting for us to help them, not to turn and run. They're depending on us. They need us, and they need us now, not 5 years from now. I am sorry, but there's nothing I can do. So you're just going to let them die? That's your heroic move, to let them suffer and die alone? I did not say that it was the preferred course of action, Lieutenant. If it were in my power to help, I would be the first in line. However, there is nothing we can do. As I say, we are not equipped to fight this fight. Neither was my husband, Koskov said through gritted teeth. And he went anyway, because that's what heroes do. They fight, no matter the odds, not just when it's convenient. Keller held out his hand, comm disc in his palm. Makes this easy on yourself, and do the right thing. Koskov laughed again. What the hell do you expect me to do with that? You will instruct Cam to stand down, Keller said. Its actions are directly inhibiting the ship's continued operations, and threatening the integrity of its systems. I cannot allow this to continue. You can't? Well, that's unfortunate. Are you refusing to comply? Koskov cocked her head to the side. What do you think? How about this? You give me my disk, let me out of here, and let me help those people down there. You do that, and maybe I can do something about your computer problems. Keller closed his fingers around the disk and lowered his hand. That is not going to happen, Lieutenant. Well, you have a problem then. I'm not doing anything until you let me out of here. You do understand that you will be held personally accountable for any and all damages resulting from these attacks? You will spend the rest of your life behind bars. You're assuming we make it back to Earth, Koskov said, leaning against one of the dryers. You're also assuming the magistrate won't just side with me. Maybe they just hook you up for cowardice in the face of the enemy, abandoning our people to die when you could have done something. Keller said nothing. Koskov sneered at him. You disgust me. The colonel slipped the disc into his pocket, his demeanor never changing. Your stasis pod will be ready in an hour. At that time, you will be placed into cryo until we arrive back on Earth, where you will be handed over to the proper authorities. And you think I'm just going to go along with that? You will cooperate, or you will face further charges, Lieutenant Koskov. And if I were you, at this point, I'd be doing everything I could to help myself. Any further resistance will not help your case. Koskov sniffed. It's a good thing I'm not like you then, because unlike you, I refuse to give up without a fight. 30. I'm going to kick the shit out of that asshole, Lander said, pacing back and forth, clenching and unclenching his fists. They'd been able to make contact with Cam for a brief window, and when he'd learned about Tally's arrest, it had been everything he could do to contain his rage. The arrogance of Keller wasn't too surprising to him. He'd known the man for the better half of 4 years, and nothing he'd learned during that time suggested that Keller would act any differently than he had. But that didn't make it any easier to stomach. Does he even have the right to arrest her? Sabatini asked. The young driver sat in the corner of the room, crossed legs propped up on an orange plastic container. He's the captain of the ship, Conley said. He can do whatever the hell he wants. No, Lander said. He can't, and I'm going to explain it to him. Rodriguez leaned back against the metal wall, crossing his arms, one foot propped on the side of Ross's cot. You talking about a jailbreak there, boss? He laughed. Count me the fuck in. Lander shook his head. Even if I wanted to, we've got our own problems down here we need to deal with first. Not to mention the dropship's out of commission, Conley added, speaking around a mouthful of spineback steak. It was surprisingly good, tender and juicy. Whoever had grilled it had done a damn fine job. He practically swallowed it whole when they'd been served, both because he was starving and because it was one of the best steaks he'd ever had. Do you think Pharaoh's okay? Sabatini asked. Ross moaned as his body convulsed again, his arms and legs pulling against the straps, as he'd done multiple times over the last few hours. His vitals had been progressively getting worse, to the point where Conley was worried he was going to have a stroke or a heart attack, or both. Nothing she or the colony medics did alleviated his symptoms. We're going to figure this out, Lander thought, fist clenched as Ross relaxed, arms and legs going limp once again. Conley moved past Lander, checking Ross's med patch. He's getting worse. I don't understand why Keller won't just send down another ship to get us, Sabatini said. For all his capability driving a rig, his understanding of their situation was naive at best. I mean, can't he just pick us up and put him in quarantine or something? Conley laughed. Shit. The chances of that happening are about as good as someone telling us this was all a bad dream. It's 5,000 to 1, Lander said, before he even knew he was going to say it. He could tell by Sabatini's expression the driver didn't understand. 5,000 souls on board, not counting Major Keller and his flight crew. What happens if Ross infects the rest of the ship? The loss of 1 means nothing compared to the loss of 5,000. Did I just defend Keller, he thought, surprised by his words. It doesn't make it right, Sabatini said. No,
No, it doesn't.
Hell no, it doesn't.
Rodriguez said, standing and crossing to the other side of the room.
I can't look at him like this anymore. Going to check on the rigs. You need anything while I'm out?
Lander shook his head, and the others declined as well. An awkward silence fell over the room after he'd left. The three drivers sitting around their comrade, all equally worried about how this thing was going to play out. Ross shivered, eyes squeezing against the obvious pain as he groaned.
If there's nothing we can do, should we...
Sabatini trailed off as Lander shot him a furious look. Absolutely not, Lander snapped. Don't even think about it. He's sick. He's not past saving. We treat him as a casualty of war until there's no other choice. And if it comes to that, I'll take care of it myself. His stomach twisted at the thought, and as he considered his words, he realized he wasn't sure if he could even do it. He stood and turned for the door. I think I need to get some air, too. Let me know if anything changes.
Will do, boss.
Outside, Lander stared up at the evening sky, wondering what Tally was doing at that very moment. The thought of her behind bars made his blood boil, and the fact that there wasn't anything he could do about it made him feel even worse. Searching the sky for any sign of their ship, he saw nothing but alien stars. What have we gotten ourselves into, Tally? He thought. Behind him, the door opened, and Sabatini poked his head through. Something's wrong. Ross raged against his restraints, growling so much his voice cracked. His eyes were open, frantically looking around the room, but seeing nothing. The veins in his neck bulged, his knuckles white with exertion. What is it? He asked. Conley looked up from where she was trying to cradle his head, keeping him from slamming it into the metal bar underneath. I don't know. Lander jerked a thumb at the door behind him and glanced at Sabatini. Get Hector. Find the medic. What's her name? Conklin? Hurry! Conley nodded, and Sabatini slid past Lander and out the door. Lander moved around to the side of Ross's cot. He exchanged a concerned glance with Conley and took a long breath, fingers unconsciously sliding over the grip of his cricket. He's going to be okay, Conley told him, her gaze moving between Lander's eyes and the hand on his weapon. Realizing what he was doing, he quickly moved his hand away, shoving it into his hip pocket. He clenched his teeth together, frustrated at seeing his man in such pain, and it seemed like he was getting worse by the second. The door swung open, slamming against the wall, and Conklin rushed in, a bag clutched in both hands. Fuck, I hope I'm not too late. She dropped the bag on the floor and knelt next to Ross's cot. Hold him steady.
What the hell is wrong with him?
Rodriguez asked, squatting at the foot of the cot. What is that? Lander asked the medic, as she produced a long hypodermic syringe from her kit. The cylinder was filled with a semi-opaque solution. Dihydrothiazine, she said, as if he should have known what that meant. Without looking up, she started wiping Ross's arm with a cleanser wipe. Lander put a hand out, covering the spot she'd just cleaned, and leaned across the couch. He kept his voice low, locking eyes with her as she met his rock-hard gaze. If you think for 1 second you're going to inject that without first explaining what it is, you've got another thing coming. Conklin hesitated for a moment, then said, It's a synthesized opioid, using some of the local elements as additives. We're pretty sure the infection attacks the central nervous system. It should slow that process down significantly and hopefully give us time to figure out a permanent solution. Wait a minute, Lander said. Should? We haven't had the opportunity to test it on live subjects. Lander scoffed, almost not believing what he'd heard. You're telling me you've never tried this before? You're guinea pigging him? We don't have a plethora of test subjects come through here, as you might imagine, Conklin said. But we've run hundreds of computer simulations, and the data is there. This does work. Does? Rodriguez said. You literally just said should. Look, I'm not the enemy here, Conklin said. I'm trying to help your friend. If you don't want... No, Lander said, his tone considerably softer than before. He gave Conley a sidelong glance. She nodded. Lander sighed. Do it. Lander pushed on Ross's chest with both hands. Rodriguez held the legs, Sabatini the arm Conklin was working with. Carefully, she slid the needle in and depressed the plunger. Ross twisted against the restraints and his friends, eyes filled with fury and anger. Within seconds, his struggling began to decrease, and soon his entire body seemed to go limp, relaxing, as if he'd just fallen asleep. Lander put a finger under his nose and felt warm breath.
That should keep him under for about 12 hours or so,
Conklin said.
You sure do say should a lot, lady,
Rodriguez said. Conklin glared at him.
Hey, you'd rather I say he's going to be absolutely fine? And what happens if he dies? What happens then, huh? I don't know for sure what's going to happen, okay? But I'm trying to help. You don't like the way I do things? Fine. You fucking do it then.
It's fine, Lander said. You did the right thing. Thank you. He looked around at the faces of his team and saw the pain and exhaustion creeping in. They'd been through so much in the last few days, and even though on the surface they appeared as if they were all keeping it together, Lander knew that confident facade was sometimes only a mask. Once that mask came off, all the problems and struggles that had been suppressed so well would come to the surface, and that's when the real horror of war would show itself. They'd already lost one member of the team, and were on the verge of losing another. And regardless of how many times a person experienced loss, it would never get any easier. Lander looked down at Ross's relaxed face and said a silent prayer for his friend before turning back to Conklin. Be straight with me, Doc. Is he going to make it? Again, Conklin hesitated, sparing a fleeting glance at Rodriguez before she spoke.
I just don't know. So we just watch him turn into one of them? Into one of those mindless goddamn zombies?
Rodriguez asked.
There's not much else we can do,
she told him. You've done what you could, Lander said. Thank you for that. What happens now?
We wait to see if the connection takes hold. If it does, he'll turn wild, or he'll remain calm.
Calm doesn't sound so bad, Lander said.
Calm is worse, she said, shaking her head. Believe me, calm is much worse.
31. The compartment lights went out, leaving Koskov in almost complete darkness. Several multicolored indicator lights on the machines around her flashed on and off, bathing the compartment in hues of yellows and greens and reds. Steam hissed from a pipe somewhere behind her, and several machines popped open, their control panels flashing wildly, electronics beeping.
Jesus, Cam,
she whispered, looking at the ceiling.
I said disrupt, not destroy.
At the far end of the compartment, Khan cursed, activating his stinger, sending glowing arcs of blue-white energy snapping into the darkness around him. Shadows danced around his face, revealing confusion and concern. He caught her gaze and straightened, expression going cold. Don't get any stupid ideas, Khan said, as the lights came back on. He clicked off the stinger, never taking his eyes off Koskov. She shoved her hands in her pockets, rocking on her heels.
Oh, I wouldn't dream of it.
He held her gaze for a long moment before looking away. It had been at least an hour since Keller had left, and the disruptions Cam was causing had grown increasingly more intense and widespread. If the laundry was having this much trouble, she was curious to know how they were handling it on the Stork's bridge, not to mention Trank 2 ops. She'd hoped Cam could differentiate between the two systems and focus solely on Stork, but because the systems were connected, a certain amount of bleed-over was inevitable. And if she was being honest, as long as Cam kept Stork in orbit, that's all Koskov cared about. Absently, she closed one of the washing machine doors and sighed, shaking her head. She needed to be in ops, needed to be doing something, not twiddling her thumbs in the damn laundry. She couldn't stand the idea of Joel being down there with no one to support him. That was her job, both professionally and personally. And the fact that both commanders were preventing her from doing that job frustrated her more than anything else in her life. Something zipped past Koskov's head, close enough she could hear it flying through the air. Before she had a chance to register what was happening, she heard a grunt of pain, and Khan collapsed to the deck.
What the hell?
Koskov turned, looking toward where she thought the shot had come from, and saw no one. She looked back to Khan, wondering if she'd imagined it. But he was still lying there, face down, stinger laying on the deck several inches away.
What are you waiting for? Signed invitation?
A female voice whispered.
Applin?
Koskov asked.
It took her a second to find the logistics officer, head hanging down from the maintenance access hatch in the ceiling.
What the hell are you doing? What does it look like? It's a jailbreak.
Applin held out her hand.
Come on, we don't have a lot of time.
Koskov used the dryers to climb up to the hatch, and with Applin's help, she rolled into the crawl space. The accessway was 1.5 meters wide and tall, each bulkhead lined with conduits and thick cables that snaked through steel frames every 2 meters. Similar cables and ducts ran along the ceiling and underneath the grated floor. She looked down both directions of the tunnel.
You're by yourself? What?
Applin asked, as if Koskov had hurt her feelings.
Never mind. What's the plan?
Here. Applin held out an open hand, a comm disc in her palm.
Brought you a welcome home gift.
Koskov chuckled and slipped the disc into the relay plate behind her ear.
Cam, are you there? I am,
Cam said. Koskov blew out a relieved breath. It had only been a few hours, but...
It's good to hear your voice,
she said.
Communicating with you again is also an enjoyable experience for me, Natalia.
Koskov smiled.
Come on,
Applin said, turning and heading down the accessway. It wasn't quite tall enough for either woman to stand straight up, and Koskov had to pay close attention to the frames, ducking under them as they went.
Where are we heading?
Koskov asked.
A deck,
Applin said over her shoulder. Koskov frowned, but didn't slow.
A deck? There's nothing up there except maintenance lockers and store... Oh.
She stopped, as her brain registered what Applin was suggesting.
Oh, come on. There isn't any other way? Cam, tell me there's another way. The likelihood of a successful escape using any of the alternative routes is extremely unlikely. Lieutenant Applin is correct in her assessment.
Great, Koskov muttered.
Just fucking great.
Applin paused at a 6-way junction, 2 shafts heading up and down, the other 4 stretching out in each cardinal direction. She had one hand on the ladder as Koskov approached.
It's not as bad as you think.
Oh, really? Koskov said, following Applin up the ladder.
I honestly can't think of a worse option. It's going to be fine. What the hell is everyone else doing? How'd you manage to sneak out of ops?
Well, actually, that's all Cam's doing. She's driving everybody crazy right now, and the ship's AI is so focused on keeping her out of its systems, it isn't able to track anything else. Keller is freaking out, and the rest of the flight crew is focused on regaining control of the ship's priority systems.
Cam's really doing a number on them, then,
Koskov said.
Nice work, Cam. I appreciate your positive reinforcement, Natalia. Please do expedite your travel. Stork's systems are pushing back quite effectively on my intrusions, and its defenses are much stronger than my attacks.
We're almost there, Applin said. Hunched over, Koskov tried to visualize Stork's layout, but inside the cramped interior of the passageway, there weren't any of the landmarks she was used to. Recessed light panels flickered as they reached another vertical shaft. The ID placard on the bulkhead read, B-Deck, frame 28. Applin immediately started to ascend the steel ladder, even as the lights went out around them.
Jesus, Cam,
Koskov muttered, feeling the first rung.
My apologies, Natalia,
Cam said.
Splitting my attention has reduced my processing capabilities for dealing with Stork's defenses.
The lights came back on.
What the hell do you mean, splitting your attention? You process millions of bits of information a second. Sustained fighting against the entirety of Stork's systems has taken a toll on my resources, especially when I'm... Stand by.
Above Koskov, Applin pulled herself off the ladder into another access tunnel.
Come on. I will be on station in approximately 5 minutes,
Cam said.
What the hell is she talking about?
Koskov shouted after Applin.
Just come on.
Koskov followed Applin into the next passage, feet clanging against the grated deck. The lights flickered again, then went completely dark. Koskov slowed, putting her hands out, feeling the sides of the tunnel.
Cam?
Koskov asked. She didn't respond. A handful of indicator lights came on, bathing the tunnel in glowing red light. Flashes of white light came from the shaft behind them as the panels blinked on and off. On the ceiling, the panels blinked on in random order, occasionally winking out, only to come back on again and hold steady. Come on, Applin said, stopping at a hatch on the bulkhead and opening the manual override panel next to it. Emergency Egress A6 was stenciled in black letters across the center of the hatch. Applin pulled the lever, the hatch unlocking with a thunk, and pulled it open. She nodded at the opening. Go. I don't think I like where this is going, Koskov said, shuffling past her and ducking through. She found herself in the anteroom of one of Stork's spinal airlocks. The emergency airlock wasn't as big as the operational airlocks off the hangar bay. The compartment held 6 ready chambers, 3 on either side, each containing a single void suit and survival pack. These suits were only meant to be used if the crew weren't able to reach the lifeboats. Koskov hesitated as Applin pulled the hatch shut behind her. I know you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Applin crossed to the nearest locker, opened it, and began pulling on the suit. Hurry! Koskov shook her head and moved to another locker. The one-size-fits-all void suit was baggy on her, even after cinching the straps down, but there didn't seem to be a plethora of alternatives. She pulled on her gloves, which Applin helped her seal, and grabbed her helmet from the shelf at the top of her locker. You know, once we're out there... Koskov trailed off as Applin slipped her helmet on, immediately locking it into place. Put it on, Applin shouted, her voice muffled by the helmet. Great, just great. Koskov pulled her own on, locked it, and tapped the wrist controls, activating the suit's internal power. She felt the familiar rush of air filling the suit and watched as the HUD activated. The suit's comm system automatically tied into the emergency band, linking with Applin. You know these are only good for a couple hours, right? Koskov asked. Applin was already working the airlock controls. Trust me. The interior hatch slid closed behind Koskov, and immediately the pale white light strips encircling the ceiling flashed to amber as the airlock's cycling system began decompressing. The process took only a few seconds, and soon the amber lights shifted to red as the outer airlock hatch unlocked and slid silently open, revealing a sea of diamonds against the black void. Twice in less than 24 hours, Koskov muttered, following Applin to the hatch. Must be some kind of record. Applin slipped outside without hesitation, grabbing the side handle and pulling herself out of the way as Koskov reached the opening. Koskov was about to follow her through when a message panel appeared on her HUD with Keller's name displayed in black lettering, stopping her in her tracks. His voice came through the helmet comm, his voice slightly distorted. Lieutenant Koskov, stand down. You are under arrest. As commanding officer of this vessel, I order you to return to the ship. Looking out at the vast blackness beyond, Koskov couldn't think of anywhere she'd rather be than inside the ship. Almost anywhere, she thought. I don't think I'll be listening to your orders today, Colonel. She swung through the hatch, grabbing the safety rail and pulling herself down to the hull. You are making a grave error, Keller said. This will not further your cause, I can assure you of this. You are merely adding to the list of serious charges you will face, Lieutenant. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Hell, piracy alone is a capital crime, punishable by death. Piracy? Koskov said, looking to Applin. I am here, Cam said. What are you... Koskov cut herself off as she turned and saw the nose of a star lifter appear, coming over the far side of Colonial One's fuselage, tranquility hanging in the void behind it. We're here, Applin said. Lieutenant Koskov, I say again, stand down immediately. Clouds of mist sprayed out from the star lifter's maneuvering thrusters, aligning its heading with their position, the ship's belly only meters away from Colonial One's hull. Spotlights on the nose flashed to life, panning back and forth over the massive ship as the drop ship's port-side cargo bay door lowered into position. You've got to be kidding me, Koskov said as the drop ship approached. Told you it was going to be fine, Applin said. I don't know if I classify this as fine or not. Lieutenant Koskov and Lieutenant Applin, by the authority granted me by Alliance law and Tranquility Coalition regulations, you are hereby ordered to stand down and return to the ship. If you do not comply, I will be forced to... Koskov tapped her wrist panel, terminating the connection. Doesn't he ever get tired of hearing his own voice? Are you kidding? Applin asked, laughing. I think he gets paid by the word. Using her magnet boots, Applin moved away from the hatch, walking across Colonial One's hull toward the dropship. Koskov got to her feet and followed, understanding finally dawning on her. Of all the dumb things you've ever done, this one sure does take the cake, she thought. 10 meters away, Applin kicked off the hull. She floated up toward the open ramp and used her suit's thrusters to spin upside down relative to the Starlifter. A moment later, her boots touched the underside of the ramp and stuck, holding firm. I'm in, Applin said. Now above Koskov, she motioned for her to follow. Come on! This is so fucking stupid, Koskov growled. She pushed off, deactivated her magnetic boots, and floated into the void. 32. A wailing alarm jolted Lander from the first sound sleep he'd had in days. He sat up too fast, immediately regretting it as his vision darkened and his head swam. What the fuck is that? He asked, trying to rub away the sleep and confusion out of his eyes. The door to the hut opened and Rodriguez came in. You okay, boss? Lander shook himself and grunted. I'm fine. What the hell is that noise? Perimeter breach, Rodriguez said. Lander snapped to full alert. Perimeter breach? Where? Northeast approach is what I heard. Something tripped a sensor about 3 miles out. Where are the others? Lander asked, getting to his feet and slipping his boots back on. Conley and Sabatini are pulling the charging cables of the rigs. Lander gave Ross one last look. The driver was still unconscious thanks to the medication Conklin had administered, but the slight grimace on the man's face suggested whatever she'd given him was wearing off. Come on, Lander said, leading Rodriguez outside. The outpost was dark, lit by random lamps hanging from cables strung between the buildings, bathing the complex in a dull yellow light. They swayed in a warm breeze, casting dancing shadows around the area. Above, intermittent cloud cover hid the majority of the night sky. Men and women rushed between buildings, apparently heading to various pre-designated positions. Some carried rifles, others boxes of ammunition, and a few held some of the AR-72s they'd liberated from New Independence not 12 hours before. 3 miles isn't that far, Lander pointed out as they jogged toward the power station where their rigs waited. He tapped his comm disc, activating the team channel. Conley, Sabatini, what's your status? Getting set up now, boss, Conley answered. My rig's having some intermittent power fluctuations, Sabatini said. Looks like one of the hits I took fouled up some of the relays. Swap them out for some of Ross's, Lander told him. I don't cancel that, he snapped, cutting Sabatini off as another thought hit him. Use Ross's rig. Sabatini answered. Ross had the only other fire unit, Lander explained. The only one besides Erstein's, he didn't add. After a moment, Sabatini said, Roger that, sir. Their rigs came into view as Lander and Rodriguez rounded the side of a mechanical shop, arrayed in a row beside the outpost's central power station. Conley was busy disconnecting the remaining cables from Lander's rig, and Sabatini was climbing into Ross's cockpit. How are we looking? Lander said, reaching his rig and leaping from its bent knee. He reached for the pull handle with his prosthetic, and as soon as his metal fingers wrapped around the bar, the unit glitched, causing the fingers to snap open. He reached up with his right hand and grabbed the lip of the cockpit, just barely keeping himself from falling back to the ground. Holy shit, boss, you okay? Conley asked, appearing below him, her hand on the back of his leg. He shook out his metal hand, then banged it against the rig's torso. It spasmed once, fingers wiggling briefly on their own before full connection returned. You couldn't have picked a worse time to fuck up, Lander told his hand, as he climbed up the rest of the way into the cockpit. He slid down into the saddle and tapped through the startup sequence. The gel around his legs locked him into place as the neural connectors clicked into position. He held his breath as the pulse of energy pulsed up and down his spine, integrating man and machine. Sabatini, Lander asked, leaning forward to see Conley climbing into her own rig. Almost there, the driver responded, the urgency in Lander's voice obvious.
He pulled the cockpit cage down, its sections now clear of mud and grass. Let's go. He led them through the outpost, weaving through a seemingly endless stream of people rushing back and forth between locations. Several trucks passed them on the way to the gates, loaded up with fighters, all freshly armed with the weapons they'd recovered. At least we did that much, Lander thought. As they neared the gates, Lander saw Williams and a small group of soldiers unloading boxes of 30mm ammo into the Nasserhorn's magazines. Need any help? Williams looked up and shook his head. We're almost done. Any idea what's coming? Not a clue. Williams took the last belt of ammunition and fed it into the magazine's receiver, then slammed the panel shut. I thought you had sensor beacons on your perimeter. We do, but they aren't great. We can get mass readings, heading, and distance. Not much else. Rodriguez stopped next to Lander and motioned a steel arm at the lieutenant as he climbed up into his rig.
Thought you said those hive hijos de puta never came out this way.
They haven't before.
Not until you bastards showed up,
Sakato snapped, appearing between Lander and Rodriguez. He walked past without sparing a look and waved at the group of fighters who had been helping Williams.
Get to your positions, damn it. This isn't a fucking scouting party.
A rover pulled up next to him, its bed filled with a group of fighters standing around something covered by a heavy tan tarp. It's about time, Sakato said, pulling himself into the bed and pulling the tarp away. Lander was surprised to see what looked like a full set of first-generation Sigma armor. Unlike the total-body exosuit employed in the modern Alliance military, the first-gen suits were comprised of armor plates on the shoulders, chest and back, arms and legs. Against unarmored infantry, the first generation of Sigmas had been considered elite, superhuman even. In modern combat, however, they were nothing more than cosplay. Sakato's face contorted in a brief shock of pain, then immediately shifted to an almost cringeworthy expression of ecstasy as the augmentation system merged with his nervous system. Sakato tested the movement, bending his arms and legs, then reached down and retrieved a heavy X-22 auto rifle, hefting it over his armored shoulder. Typically speaking, the weapon was mounted on vehicles as a secondary, too heavy for a soldier to carry without augmentation. Servos whined as the plates shifted with Sakato's movements, allowing him to easily handle the weapon. He jumped out of the rover's bed and motioned to his men.
Get moving.
Lander stepped up to Williams as the driver climbed into his rig. If you have any more tricks up your sleeve, now is the time to share. We have a few dozen white phosphorus rounds, the lieutenant answered. We know it works against the drones and Vindicators, but won't do much to slow down their rigs. Of all the things Lander had expected him to say, white phosphorus hadn't been one of them. Willie Pete, as they called it during his time in the Alliance, wasn't strictly speaking an offensive combat weapon. In fact, its use had been banned for everything except target designation and signaling. Using it against people was considered at best a disgustful tactic, at worst a war crime. The pyrophoric self-ignited on contact with air and fiercely consumed any combustible. Lander shook his head. Don't know if I like the idea of using that against people. Except that those aren't people, Sakato argued. Are you certain there isn't any helping them? Sakato hesitated. That's what I thought, Lander said. Sounds like 3 subjugators at least, Williams said, looking up from his console. Hard to tell on the Vindicators, but I've never heard of that many subjugators operating so close together, so there's no telling. And I wonder whose fault that is, Sakato growled, glaring at Lander and his team.
Hey, fuck off, pendejo,
Rodriguez snapped.
We came here to help you people. Fine fucking job you're doing, isn't it?
Sakato asked.
There's only one reason they came all the way out here, and if we survive this, I guarantee I'm going to rectify that problem.
Rodriguez pointed his oversized sword at Sakato, its tip aimed directly at the soldier's face.
You will make a move on Ross, pendejo, and I'll drop you like a mouthy hooker. You'll try,
Sakato answered, sparing Rodriguez a brief glance before turning away and heading for the gates.
Fucking asshole,
Conley said, stepping up beside Lander. Forget about him for now, Lander said. We've got bigger problems to deal with.
I wish the motherfucker would try,
Rodriguez said, pounding the flat side of his blade into his steel palm. One thing at a time, Lander said. Focus up, people. This is the real thing. Make your shots count and don't get cocky. Keep your head on a swivel and don't get tunnel vision. Our job is to protect the outpost, not play hero. Everybody got that? The 3 remaining members of his team all nodded affirmative. We've seen how they fight, Lander continued. They'll come at us with no regard for their own safety. Use that to your advantage. The priority will be the rigs. If you engage one, be sure you sound off. And don't get cut off if you think they're flanking retreat to the wall. Lander checked his blogger again, ejecting the cylinder, checking his count.
That thing ain't going to do much against a rhino,
Rodriguez said. Lander nodded. Granted, but it'll slow them down and give the rest of us time to coordinate fire. A group of haggard-looking people jogged by. The colonists they brought back with them after the armory raid. They looked malnourished and tired, but they all had weapons in their hands regardless, ready to fight to the death for their home. They jogged up the switchback stairs to the top of the wall and found positions among the fighters already posted. Lander led his team out of the main gates, which shut with a resounding bang behind him. He motioned for Rodriguez and Sabatini to cover north of the gates, while he and Conley held the south. The outpost comm he'd been given before the armory raid buzzed to life. Williams's voice came through, with a hint of trepidation in the words. 900 meters. What's their position? Lander asked. Where are they coming from?
directly west.
Right at the gate, Lander realized. It looks like the rigs are holding back, Williams continued. Beacon 4 still has them about past 1,200 meters.
At that distance, those rhinos are right on top of us,
Conley said. Lander nodded. Things start to go bad for them, they call in the reinforcements. The main assault force is probably going to be Vindicators and drones, Williams said. Drones will be first.
Goddamn zombie fuckers,
Rodriguez said. 700 meters. The crack of a gunshot in the distance echoed through the trees, making it all but impossible to tell where it had actually come from. No way of telling whether it was one of their people or the hive. Several more shots rang out, followed by an almost rhythmic staccato of fire. Who's firing? Williams shouted across the comms. If you have contact with the enemy, report. Lander scanned up and down the battle line, looking for any sign of the attackers, and saw nothing but shadows.
Where the hell are they?
Conley asked. I don't know, Lander answered. But they're out. A rocket streaked out of the darkness, the flaming trail illuminating the area in a dull orange-red glow. It shot through the air over the wall and arched down into the outpost, slamming into something Lander couldn't see, and erupted into a brilliant fireball. Pieces of flaming debris sprayed in all directions, and the faint screams of terror and pain could just be heard over the onslaught of oncoming small arms fire. Lander caught movement in the tree line ahead and leveled his blogger. Here they come! Tiny flashes of light erupted from the shadows, and he heard the rounds zip past, striking the outpost wall behind him. He fired 3 rounds from the blogger, the muffled thump, 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 insignificant compared to the sounds of gunfire around him. Don't waste your ammo on shit you can't see, a voice in the back of Lander's mind told him. He lowered his steel arm and drew his cricket, tapping the button to extend the weapon. Pulling it into his shoulder, he began spot firing, giving each target a 3 to 5 round burst as he worked down the line. Numbers in the bottom left corner of the cricket's holographic optic counted down until Lander squeezed off the last remaining 6.5mm bullet. The bolt locked back, and despite never having used the weapon in combat, performed an emergency reload, dropping the empty magazine and slapping in another in one smooth motion. He tapped the bolt release with the heel of his palm and went back to work.
Getting pretty thick over here, boss,
Rodriguez called over the comm. Lander looked to his position and saw Rodriguez's steel arm bringing his sword down hard, slicing a man in 2. Behind Rodriguez, Sabatini was laying an impressive amount of fire with his own cricket. But between the teams, a stream of drones was charging into the small clearing in front of the outpost wall. "Hey," Lander shouted at the fighters along the parapets. "Shoot!" He shifted fire, dropping 4 to the ground, causing several more to trip over them in their haste for the wall. Gunfire erupted from the top of the wall, raining chaos and destruction down on the charging drones. He caught motion out of the corner of his eye and shifted just in time to see a man dressed in black kick off a moss-colored boulder and launch himself into the air toward Lander's left side. On instinct, Lander twisted left, bringing his steel arm around in a powerful backswing, slamming into the man mid-jump. The impact only slightly jarred his reactive sensors, but the snap of the man's bones as he wrapped around the rig's wrist made Lander cringe. No time for that, Lander told himself, already turning back to the threat at hand, bringing up his blogger and adding his fire to the mix. One right after another, the drones appeared from the shadows, rage and hatred and fury plastered across their faces as they scrambled to reach their target. The stench of gunpowder and death was filling the air, calling back memories Lander didn't have time to face. "Son of a bitch!" Rodriguez shouted, tossing 2 drones into the air with a solid backhand blow. He brought his blade around in a level arch, slicing through 5 in a single swing. Screams of agony rippled through the air. They twisted Lander's stomach. "There's too many!" Sabatini shouted, backing his rig toward the gates. Rodriguez slammed his blade down into the ground and pulled 2 men from his steel shoulders, tossing them away like they were toys, their bodies spinning helplessly through the air. Sabatini kicked a woman, charging for his steel leg, and shot another 2 as they came through a small cluster of trees. Another rocket spiraled through the air above them, slamming down into the outpost behind Lander, exploding with a chest-rattling boom. A cloud of smoke and flame curled up from behind a row of buildings. Light from the hanging lights and already burning fires reflecting in the billowing smoke. A blood-curdling scream pulled Lander's attention back to the tree line, where at least 20 drones emerged, all racing straight for him. He cursed, backpedaling toward the wall, and lifted his left hand, the torch activating with the flick of his thumb. Time slowed. He gritted his teeth, finger hovering over the switch, wishing more than anything he could make a different choice and knowing there was nothing else he could do. He depressed the switch and sent a stream of compressed fuel streaking through the darkness. The mixture ignited a fraction of a second later, turning the entire area into a fiery hell. The flames rolled over the attackers like water, igniting clothes, skin, hair. Gobs of flame sprayed everywhere as the victims flung themselves away from the attack, diving and rolling on the ground, screaming and dying. A dozen flaming figures fled into the night, disappearing into the forest, spreading the fire even further. "Lander, look out!" a voice shouted through the local comm. He turned, trying to discern who was speaking, and caught sight of a rocket streaking through the air. It slammed into the wall, erupting into a fireball and throwing several fighters from their perch above. The concussion wave pounded against his rig, and though he felt it in his chest, the rig itself didn't move. Before he could trace where the fire had originated, 2 more rockets screamed in, much closer than the first had been. He turned to run, just as they hit home not 20 meters behind him, and this time he felt the explosion. The blast wave knocked his steel body forward and off its feet. He slammed down hard, cage digging a shallow trench into the earth, filling his cockpit with dirt and grass once again. 33. Lander pushed himself up to his steel knees, hearing nothing but the high-pitched ringing in his ears. He tried batting the dirt away from his cage for a few seconds before thumbing the latch and throwing it open. The cage bounced off the top of the rig, shaking the majority of the dirt off, though more than a little fell down into the cockpit, working into the crevices around his waist. He felt Rodriguez before he saw him, steel feet thumping into the ground next to him. He rammed his huge sword into the ground and reached out to help Lander up, while protecting
blocking their flank with his shield. Rodriguez said something Lander couldn't hear, then jerked his sword out of the ground and pointed. "To go!" Rodriguez said, words finally cutting through the ringing in Lander's ears. He flinched, his rig ducking with him as another rocket screamed overhead. Fires raged around him, throwing dancing shadows across every surface. Outpost soldiers pulled friends away from the destruction as fighters who'd managed to remain topside doused the area in an almost constant barrage of gunfire. Drones poured out of the forest only to be cut down, littering the ground with bodies. Lander leveled his blogger as a vindicator with a rifle appeared, the man's face a mask of fury as he fired up at the outpost defenders. Lander fired once, his arm barely bucking, and a second later, the heavy round slammed into the man's chest, throwing him back into the forest. "Suppressing fire!" William shouted through the comm. "Force them back!" Before Lander could argue, he caught sight of the metal canisters twirling over the wall, landing just behind the tree line. He couldn't hear the pop, but the spray of white smoke and starbursts tearing through the underbrush was unmistakable. Fires erupted up and down the battlefield as smoke billowed. Drones caught in the middle clutched at their throats, dropping to their knees or trying to outrun the smoke, hacking painfully as they breathed it in. Several cleared the clouds, only to be cut down by the defenders, cutting their pained coughs short as their lives abruptly ended. "Come on!" Rodriguez shouted. "Boss, we need to go!" A Vindicator emerged out of the smoke, wearing the same Sigma exo armor Sakato had donned just prior to the battle, and a full face helmet and rebreather, the smoke not phasing him the slightest. He hefted an autocannon off his shoulders and dropped to one knee, leveling the weapon at Rodriguez's back. Rig or not, a hit from around that size would be deadly. "Down!" Lander shouted, twisting to push Rodriguez out of the way. He tried to bring his blogger up, but was out of position and off balance. He was too late. Suddenly, Conley appeared out of the darkness, her rig illuminated by a dozen fires. She slammed into the ground between the shooter and Lander, her steel torso rotating to the side, hand extended, blade coming around in a flat arch. It sliced through the man so fast that for a moment Lander thought she'd missed, and a moment later the man's torso slid clean off his waist, spilling blood and internal organs across the ground. Conley held her stance for a moment, arm extended behind her, blade pointing away from her, glistening red with blood. "Holy shit!" Rodriguez yelled, when he finally saw what she'd done. "We need to retreat," Lander shouted, pointing to the gaping hole in the wall. "I'll cover you." He turned and fired his blogger into the tree line as he backed toward the wall, each round punching through a growing wall of fire that was spreading by the minute. Then he froze, hearing the familiar rhythmic thuds of steel legs moving at high speed. A second later, a Nasserhorn emerged from the flames and charged the wall, paying no heed to the dozens of bodies it crushed under its feet. Lander moved without thinking, charging forward and taking advantage of the fact that the enemy rig had apparently not seen him. Kicking off a large boulder, he shot into the air, landing 2 meters to the side of the rig. The Nasserhorn turned to bring its cannons to bear, but Lander was already there, grabbing each barrel with separate steel hands and pushing with everything he had. The main gun fired, vibrating his fingers. He twisted, tipping the rig off balance and sending it reeling back through the flames. Leveling his blogger, he fired until it was empty, then turned and raced for the wall. "Go!" he screamed, waving at defenders to abandon their positions. Several hesitated, but at his repeated commands finally relented and joined their companions, running back through the maze of the outpost. Lander stopped next to Conley just inside the wall and surveyed the retreat. "This keeps up much longer. We're not going to be able to..." Sparks flashed as something slammed into Conley's rig's shoulder, knocking her into a small mechanical shop. The rig smashed through the prefab metal walls, crushing everything inside before Conley could regain control.
Lander looked from her to where the shot had come from, and saw the Nasser horn he'd thrown down charging at them once again. His mind raced as he worked through his options. Too far for the flamethrower, and his blogger was empty. The only thing within reach was a small electric ATV laying on its side. Conley had kicked it aside during her fall. He snatched it up and hurled it toward the charging war rig, immediately sprinting after it. The Nasser horn's main cannon boomed, splitting the ATV in two. The flaming halves spun through the air, trailing smoke and debris, landing and bouncing along the ground, disintegrating as they rolled. Lander never stopped. In the air, a second after the ATV had been split apart, kicking off a large boulder and sending his rig arcing through the air. He came down hard, driving his steel knee into the twin guns, bending both at odd angles and rendering them useless.
Okay. Okay, at this point I want to remove as little gold as possible, but I don't want to have any hole on my gold too. That's why I try to use the surface of the support to keep myself from removing too much gold, because of course the steel is much harder than the gold. So if I stay on the steel most of the time, it's going to keep me from going too low. See, I got some dark spot here and there, and this one here. It's where the gold is a little lower than on the part which are already not polished but scratched by the sandpaper. So I'm going to do something like that. Try to move some of the gold, some excess gold. I'm going to try to move it to the place where I don't have enough. So you always need to have a little too much gold, within reason of course. Going to do it a little more. I'm using some very coarse paper right now. I mean, not right now, but when I was doing some polishing earlier, because I wanted to have some gold to play with. Of course, if need be, I can always add more gold, and I may have to do it anyway. But I want to do it as little as possible. See, right now, when you do that polishing, that part here is not polished. It's not the same grip that what you see here. So I'm actually not touching this part here, which means that my gold is overall still above the support, which at this point is desirable because I want to be able to move the gold. When I will be flush with the support, I won't be able to do that much. So I want to do it now when I still have some extra gold to play with. And hopefully I will have enough of it to fill up the space. And I can do a little tapping too. Try to even thin out. Of course, when you tap it, you always take a chance that the gold is going to lose its anchorage, which is inconvenient, obviously. But you have to keep in mind that guns are made to be shot. So, if tapping around right now is going to loosen the gold, it will do the same thing when people are shooting the thing. Of course, it's much easier to do it now when you still have the stuff in your hand than to have the client being unhappy because you didn't do a good job to start with. And considering that I never had a gun coming back because my gold inlay would fall out, I think that extra step is time consuming, but it's not as time consuming as redoing it. And that without counting the bad will that you create when people have to send their stuff back. I think people don't like it, and I think they are right. I would not like it either. So. You have to keep the surface clean as much as possible, because if you got some steel when you tap it that way, or when you hammer it, you can inlay some dust particle into your gold. And if you do that, and if you don't see it, like this stuff here. If you don't see it, it's going to get into your gold, and then when it's blue, those particles are going to be blue. And it's going to look like if you got stuff going from the bottom to the surface. Which is really not desirable. Okay, I'm going to do it a little more, see where I am. Still has that stupid line there. Okay, let's see. And some of it did disappear. See, I'm still above. Not much, but a little. I got that line almost gone here. I think it will be gone eventually. Yeah, it's going to go away. Maybe not. Huh. I just have a little defect here. Just here. Let's see if it's going to go. See what I was telling you about the polishing. See the grip here. Still not the same that the grip is there. So I'm still a little above. Not much. But maybe enough. Yeah. I'm going to take 320 if I can find some. My place is always such a mess. Let's see if I can't find what I need. Got some 400. Maybe that one. See, now I don't really bother with the hole because basically I don't have any left. So I just need to flush it with a support. And once again, I try to use the support, still as a support, to keep me from removing the gold unevenly. Because if you don't do it that way, and if you try to polish, use the gold, you are going to create, you are going to remove the gold too much. And then you will have some sort of concavity. And you can see the concavity because it doesn't reflect the light the same way. That's something flash. So I want to avoid doing that. So I try to remove my hole on the place where I don't have enough gold. I first try to do it before I get to that stage. See? All is gone. But I'm still a little above. So I'm going to continue polish. By the way, when you polish, you have to use something hard to hold the paper. Because if you use your finger is going to create a declination or a hole on the gold. I use some piece of aluminum because I find that convenient. This is a pretty good inlay. If I add some hole, it will show because the polishing will not be the same on the hole, obviously, that it will be on the rest of the surface. Remove the stuff and try to polish from front to rear and rear to front, because as much as you can try, you're never going to push evenly. Let's see if I can do it that way a little. Yep. So now I'm going to use some 400. And you see, on the edge of my inlay, here I got a bright spot, which is not really desirable, but I don't have one here. And most likely, if I polish a little this way, I'm going to make it disappear. I'm still with my 400 grit paper. And of course, most of my paper is mostly on the steel, so I don't dig a hole on my gold. And now I'm going to do it a little more because and now I'm going to use some 600. I don't polish more than 600. I don't like the stuff very polished. Oh. And as you can see, it is evenly polished. There is no dark spot, which means that my inlay is both flat and with no hole, which is the way it's supposed to be. Usually I use a little of that because I like the finish. And this stuff doesn't remove any metal. But it makes the polish more even, I think. So, that's all for now. Tomorrow I will start to do the shading of my beast. That one is a woodchuck. And eventually I may do some background into it. I was told not to, but I think it will look much better with. So I will. I think you never have to be afraid to contradict your client. You are the, how do you call the expert, and they are not. And people will never really blame you for doing more work than what they were asking, as long as you don't charge them extra for it. I did a good job. Okay, take care of yourself and enjoy the rest of your day or night, evening, whatever is the time for you. Bye-bye for now. Oh, I gotta find my stuff to close it.